Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back at it again. More off-season reviews. This time we're going, unfortunately, to covering a couple other teams that I think their off-seasons were a little bit weaker, spoiler alert. We'll start off with the Sacramento Kings and the Chicago Bulls. So, yeah, we'll start with the Kings. And their off-season, I guess, is somewhat incomplete, right? Because there are potentially a couple of moves that they might have to make because we don't know what's going to happen with Russell Westbrook, right? There was reporting for decent amount of the last few weeks that the Kings have been looking to add Westbrook, maybe potentially by trading away Malik Monk. That seems to have quieted down, right? So now the thought process is it's possible they don't move one of their other guards because they have a lot of those on the roster. He may just be, just not on a team because it seems like that's the main team that wants him. But the Kings, in terms of their summer moves, they made a couple. The big one that they made, I guess, was they signed Dennis Schroeder to a 3-year deal. Now, I believe not all 3 years are guaranteed, so it doesn't necessarily, it's not as bad as it sounds, but it is a bizarre decision just because the Kings, to me, have a number of guys that can handle the ball and create offense that were already on the roster. You have Zach LaVine, you have DeMar DeRozan, you have Sabonis who can do that as a center. You even have Malik Monk off the bench. So it just feels like adding Dennis Schroeder to this seems kind of unnecessary, especially if the Westbrook thing also happens, which is probably why they're trying to look to move some of these other guards. So, I mean, for Schroeder, it's great because, again, he's kind of slowly but surely, well, he's not going to get it back, right? But he's slowly but surely getting some of the money that he lost out on when he didn't get that contract when he was back in LA, right? So he's gotten a couple contracts since then. So good for him with that one. And again, his season was wild because he started the year in Brooklyn where he played great. Then he was traded to Golden State. Honestly, didn't really play very well, didn't really fit. When the trade happened at the time, like, we thought it was a good addition because you gave up nothing to get him because it was an injured DeAnthony Melton. But the fit we thought was poor because he's not like a strong outside shooter. He needs the ball in his hands and he's small. It's like, I just don't think that was a good fit there. And he didn't play very well there. Then he gets traded to Detroit in that Jimmy Butler trade, or he got rerouted. And he honestly played pretty well in Detroit, right? So he ended up being kind of a crucial piece for them off the bench. He closed a number of games for them as well, but now he's in Sacramento. And I'm curious to see again what his role is, right? As, a point guard, because they don't really have a lot of, traditional point guards on the roster, right? Because they, like I said, they have mostly other guys who are ball handlers. They have a couple of guys that could, quote unquote, play it in a pinch, that are more so, I guess, like defensive minded guys like Devin Carter, as well as, what's the other guys? Keon Ellis, right? So they have so those guys are kind of the other players on the roster that fill that role of defensive minded guys. And like I said, Schroeder can defend as well at the point of attack. He's just small. Then they also drafted Neat Clifford, and that was the move that we actually did like, and we liked it at the time, right? From Colorado State. He's an older rookie. He's 23. But again, he actually also had a pretty strong summer league as well. So he looks like another one of those guys that could be a good athlete, that can get up and down the floor, that can help defend, because the Kings don't have a lot of those type of players, right? Again, just like a lot of these other guys, as long as he can take advantage of the open shots he's going to get and, the other cuts to the basket and things like that, he should be fine. And he's got good size, right? He's about 6'6", 6'7", and he's not really skinny, right? So I like that pick for the Kings a decent amount. But outside of that, most of the other moves on the roster are kind of whatever, right? They brought in Drew Eubanks. They brought in Terrence Davis. They traded Jonas Valanciunas for Dario Saric, right? That seems probably more like a cost-cutting move, right? Because he didn't really do anything for the Nuggets last year except help them land Jonas Valanciunas. So I guess that's pretty much a plus there for them. But just when you look at this Kings roster, I think the part that's so difficult to figure out is what is the vision for this team. Now, they did draft a couple other guys, right? Like, I mean, they drafted Raynaud, right, from Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, exactly. They drafted him, and he seems like he might be another solid player. But again, he's, I believe on like a two-way deal, right? So he's not so he probably won't be like a part of the normal roster. But that's the part of this that's so confusing about this team, is that what is the vision for this group? What is the point of this roster? What are they looking to do? Are they looking to contend and win games? Because I don't necessarily know if they're quite good enough to be able to do that, especially defensively. It's not a championship level team, but I don't think that's what the Kings were looking for anyways. They've been trying to just put together a good roster. And like there's talent on the top end of the roster, but I just don't think it fits together all that well, right? Like your three best players, I guess, what? Sabonis, Levine, and DeMar DeRozan. Where is that going to be able to get you in the Western Conference? I just don't think it's going to be able to get you that far, right? Especially, again, the surrounding pieces either don't fit or just are not that great. Keegan Murray, wildly enough, right, when he was first on the team, he had a really good rookie year, right? But he's almost kind of been an afterthought on the team as of late, right? I don't even know what's going to happen with him at this point. I mean, you'd assume that he could be part of the roster, and there could be other stuff that they need to figure out, because let's say they trade DeRozan, right? Let's say they trade, I don't know, Malik Monk or one of these other guys, right? Maybe that opens the door, opens minutes for some of these guys, but they haven't done that as of yet. So I just don't quite understand what the purpose of this team is. And as I said in the short, I don't necessarily know if they do either. So is this team going to be good? Probably not.
No.
Right? So in other words, if that's the case, what's the point of this roster? And I remember when they first signed DeRozan, I think, we thought that the team would be okay, right? Because I think we just thought like, all right, you added DeRozan, that's another guy that can help you score. But I don't think we were as high on what the Kings did as maybe some other people were, because we're also like, they're in the West. The West is a tough conference. And early on in the season, right, they didn't do that great, right? And they kind of struggled. They struggled to win close games. Then eventually they fired Mike Brown. Then they had that stretch where they were winning games again. But just like what normally happens when you replace the coach during the season, it makes a small impact. Makes an impact early on, then it's basically same business as usual after that. So obviously the problems extended beyond the coaching. I mean, I guess now it's Doug Christie at the helm. They gave him an extension. We'll see what he actually does. I mean, again, I don't think the Kings were really tangibly different once he took over, aside from that beginning stretch. And then obviously they made the trade, so the roster was different there as well. But other than, like I said, the guys that they drafted, nothing else that they really did, honestly, impressed me at all. Because, like I said, the Schroeder pick is just kind of whatever. Again, like I said, Maxime Reynaud. Again, I wish I'd said initially what his skill set was, right? But he's actually like a pretty good stretch big, and he's got some size. He's from France. Again, he's another guy that played well in the summer league. So, like I said, I liked their draft picks of him and Nick Clifford, but nothing else they really did, honestly, made me smile at all. Honestly, it just made me confused. And so I'm going to give him an F because, like I said, I just don't really like any of the moves other than the draft picks. But the other stuff, to me, kind of cancels it out until they can figure out how this roster is going to play out. Because, like I said, what is the makeup of this team? Again, like you're looking at it, and yeah, the three guys that I mentioned are going to be starters. And then who are the other two starters next to them? Is it Schroeder? Is it, Keegan Murray? Is it those two guys? If they get Westbrook, what's his role? What are they going to do in order to bring him in? Because I think they don't have any roster spots, which is the other reason why he's not there. So maybe you like him more than me. I don't think you do, but I don't want to speak for you. Yeah, so you might as well get on with it and tell me what you think. Because, like I said, I understood why they did what they did last year, right? In terms of like, all right, our offense took a step back this season before, so let's bring in an offensive guy in DeRozan. But it was too much. It was to the point where it was too much overlap and it didn't work. And then obviously Fox wanted to leave, so you had to trade him. And like, yeah, they got back Levine, but it just wasn't good enough. And now I don't understand. So maybe you can enlighten me, but I don't know.
I'm just as lost as you. And I'm disgusted, if you want me to be honest, because I don't understand this roster, like you said. And I appreciate you breaking it down for us, because it's like, I mean, there's no real sense of direction here. There's no identity at all, right? You're bringing a duo in, right? You had Zach LaVine last year, and you had DeRozan last year. Now this will be our first, I guess, time seeing them full season in Sacramento. But I don't think it's really going to matter. We've seen this before. It was bad. At best there was a good time, there was a good stretch, but injuries ruined that team, and they just never really got back to what they could have been.
They had better defenders too.
Exactly. Like you had guys like Caruso, you had Lonzo Ball, surrounding those guys. But on this roster, it's not even remotely the same. You can't replicate that. You have Sabonis as well, and I think that's another conversation that we can get into maybe towards the end of what I'm about to say. But overall, I just don't understand any move that they really made this offseason, right? You got Valanciunas from Washington, cool. But then you go ahead and trade him for Dario Saric. I don't see the logic there, right? And I guess
I think that's a funny thing.
Right, and even then, I still don't get it, because if you're trying to be good, I think it would probably help you to keep Valanciunas on board, but instead they went with the latter. Schroeder was the priority. I remember talking about that for a decent amount of time, right? Like it was pretty much known. It was pretty much known that Sacramento had their sights set on Schroeder for whatever reason. Cool, you got your point guard. You address that, but that's not the kind of caliber move you should be priding yourself on. You know what I mean? It's just I don't know what the point of you said it best. You don't know what the point of the team is if they're trying to be good, because this roster just straight up isn't good. Like you said, the young guys have some upside. I'm much lower on Keegan Murray than I was last year, and definitely much lower than I was on him the year before. So I'm kind of losing my faith in him in terms of what he can really be, because I think there was conversation of, well, if he can become a star, then potentially that team can kind of take a little bit of a leap offensively and, maybe free up some flexibility. But that never really happened. Devin Carter, don't want to write him off, but not super high on him. And I thought he was more of a diamond in the rough in last year's draft. But, we kind of just have to see, because the problem is the jump shot isn't really there. He has the other stuff, I think, but comfortability and jump shot isn't there yet. The two rookies, Neat Clifford, that's cool. We'll see what happens. But I just don't know how many wins this team is going to get. I don't think it's going to net them a lot. They did no moves to really improve. You lost Valanciunas, you lost Jake LaRavia. Okay, those aren't major losses, right? But you didn't bring in anybody good. The team already stunk last year. And I'm sorry, but I think this brings up the other conversation. How do you feel about Sabonis? Because before last year, I probably would have put him in the underrated category. But now I think I'm putting him in the overrated category, if you want me to be honest. And I don't like the trio of LaVine, DeRozan, and Sabonis together. I think it's nasty. It's trifling. You have so much overlap, like you already talked about. These are all guys, that operate, pretty well inside the three-point line. I mean, I guess LaVine, probably the best shooter of the three, but even then has some hot moments, some cold moments as well. You don't really have the best option at point guard to, help those guys get the best out of their abilities. But even then, that's a tall task, because you have three guys like that. And we already saw the overlap when LaVine wasn't there, right? And it was already a little bit too much, I think, between DeRozan and Sabonis. And that's not even including Fox. So you add in LaVine, who's a high usage guy who has tendency to also have low efficiency. It's just nasty. And I don't understand that trio, and the additions that they made don't help the case of, people who would defend a trio like that. But I think the NBA world has a consensus feeling of this team sucks. They don't know what they're doing, and they're doomed because they have no present and they have no future. And quite frankly, they never even had a real past. That's all I have to say. Automatic F for me.
Yeah, and it's tough because, a couple seasons ago, again, first year we did this podcast, the 22-23 season, Kings were good, right? They ended up making the playoffs. They were the 3 seed. They took the Warriors to 7 games. I know they were the higher seed, but most people did not expect them to win that series, right? That was kind of expected to be a rout, right? It wasn't even really expected to be like an exciting seven. Well, maybe exciting, entertaining, but I don't think most people expected it to go seven. I think most people kind of assumed that Golden State was just going to kind of wipe the floor with the Kings, and the Kings had a real chance. But you had De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, and then the other mix of guys around them. Where I think the roster, maybe the high end talent, like maybe they didn't have as many high end talent guys, but it was a better fit of guys, right? Because what was the group? It was Fox, it was Barnes, it was Murray, and then it was Sabonis. And then I think what was it, like Kevin Herter, who didn't really play well in that series, but like just as a whole, just the grouping together made a little bit more sense because it's like, all right, Fox and Sabonis are not strong 3-point shooters, so surround them with guys who are good 3-point shooters. And like, they were really good offensively, they were not very good defensively, but in the playoffs they did get better. And then the year after that, then they took a step back, probably because that group just wasn't quite as sustainable because they had, everybody was healthy. And, you could kind of tell that their style of play was probably built a little bit more so for the regular season. Even though, again, I think they did better in the playoffs than probably some people expected, even though they didn't win. But now it's not De'Aaron Fox, it's LaVine. And just like you kind of hinted at it, right? Where you mentioned, like, the lack of a point guard. Because it's just like, a guy like Sabonis, who's a center, even though he can run your offense and is kind of like a point center, he's not Jokic, right? He's like, and even with Jokic, he has Jamal Murray who can play off of him, and you just don't really have a guy like that. Again, LaVine is a different type of guard, from those type of guys, because he can, I guess, run your offense, but really more so as like a scorer, right? Not really as like a normal facilitating point guard. He doesn't really do that as comfortably, even though he's a good shooter and he can play, off of guys in that regard. But just in general, at the contracts, 48 million this year for LaVine, 42 million for Sabonis. Those are your two best players, basically. And that's just not going to be good enough because, again, LaVine, also, it's been a while since he was the best player on, like a really good team. And you could make the case that maybe like him and DeRozan were neck and neck for best player when they were on the Bulls. But just as a whole, it's just something where I just don't necessarily think it's going to work out. And again, like I said with Sabonis, this is kind of why centers need a guard, like I said, to play off of. But even then, what's the ceiling with Sabonis as your starting center, right? Because even then, as I already said, he's not in the upper tier. Like he's not a top 5 center, I don't think, right? Like
No,
you rank,
no,
yeah,
no.
like
God, no.
I don't know, like I guess you could say top 10, but not top 5 center, right? So
I'll
it's
agree with
like,
that.
so yeah, and again, when you're in the lower tier of the top 10, right, then that means you have less margin for error in certain categories, right? Because like, yeah, Jokic is not a strong defender either, but he's a much better offensive player than Sabonis, even though Sabonis is a good offensive player. And you can there's clearly a pathway to build a good roster around Jokic because they won a championship already, and they've by and large been a 50-win team pretty much every year for the last several years, right? Where I don't think you can say that about Sabonis. And with the new CBA, that is kind of where you have some questions about, like, do we really want to pay this guy X amount of money when it's pretty clear like that you're probably, especially in the Western Conference, you may not be guaranteed to be that great of a team with him
Right.
as your best player, right? And like that's kind of the issue there. So again, he's not bad. It's just none of these guys you would want to be the best player on your team, and that's kind of one of the reasons why this team is where it is. Is just because again, when you had Fox and Sabonis, I mean, people argued about which guy was better but both of them were. But Fox as a guard is one of the better guards, point guards in the game. He's not a top 5 point guard necessarily, but he's still very good. But you just don't have that at all in Sacramento. It's, like I said, it's just mainly just a bunch of scorers, right? And like Fox is a scorer. He's not like a traditional pass first point guard, but he's just better at playmaking than the other guys. Other than like DeRozan is a good passer playmaker, but he's not a point guard either, and he's also 36. Even though he's still good, but that's kind of the issue here is that like none of these players are players that are a good starting point, in my opinion. Like you need to have somebody on the perimeter who's just better than the guys that they have, and you obviously you can't have that with this mix of players. So ultimately, somebody's got to go, and it's I would think because of his age, it would be DeRozan. But, if you're another team, what's another team that's going to want him? Now, in fairness, contract is not that bad. It's honestly not bad at all because he's making 24 million this year. Then the next year, it's most of it's not even guaranteed. So if you trade for him, that could be a contract where you could save yourself a decent amount of money for a guy who's still good. I just don't know what team is going to automatically be interested in picking that up. Because they have guys, like I said, that are good individual players that if they're on your team and they're not your best or second best player, that works. That's fine. But that's not the case here. So, and as we said, it again, not everybody's going to be fortunate enough to have a top 5, top 10 player as the best player on their team. But even those teams, like, we know what they're doing. We know what they're trying to do. Like, the Wizards don't have a top 10 player on the roster at all.
Yeah, you
but we
keep
know what they're
reminding me.
trying to do. Like, we know that, like, we understand the vision. They're rebuilding. So nobody has any issues with anything that the Wizards have done this summer, other than, I don't know, we can talk about it when we get there, like maybe that they have too many young guys, but who knows? But for Sacramento, is there anybody that likes what they did this summer?
No,
I don't know. Like, I mean, that's kind of the problem here. And I know it sounds like I'm being kind of mean or kind of harsh, but just
you have to be in this situation though. Look at it.
Right.
When there's no clear direction, when we're left with the result of confusion after an offseason, that's an automatic F, I think.
Right. So that's the problem. So that's where, like, with the Sabonis conversation, it's like, yeah, like it's not going to work with this group.
Yep.
Like, maybe if you bring in somebody who's better, but how are the Kings going to do that? That's the problem.
They won't.
So if they can't do it, probably just going to have to blow it up. But I don't think they want to blow it up because they've been trying to get to the point of competing for a while, and it just kind of just is gone. So I don't know what they're going to do, but at the very least, I mean, like Sabonis. I mean, Sabonis himself even almost kind of hinted at, like, yeah, we'll talk and we'll see where we're at. So it's almost like he's kind of like planning for a potential exit.
Yeah.
So who knows with that? Like I said, I don't know what the Kings do, but just I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this roster, and I hadn't really been a huge fan of their roster in a while. I think the first year it was a great story, but I don't think neither you nor I thought it would sustain. And, like, they weren't bad the year after. I think they won 46 games. It's just 46 games in the Western Conference is not good enough.
Yep. Simple as that.
Yeah, they were in that 9-10 spot, and they actually did beat the Warriors. So, I guess, okay, hooray for them. But they still didn't make the playoffs because then they lost to the Pelicans.
Yep.
Without Zion. So, I don't know. I mean, looking at their over-under, it's at 35.5. I mean, yeah, they could win more than 35 games, but even if they win more than 35 games, they're still probably going to be in the bottom, I don't know, 5 tier of the Western Conference, right? Somewhere between like 9 to 15.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Are you going over or under for that one?
Under. Point
Really?
blank. I know that might be kind of crazy because I think regular season they could definitely net some wins, but I just don't think they're going to be able to stick it to teams. I think they're going to lose a lot of games here, obviously. That's why I'm taking the under. And the West got better. Simple as that. I think there's some younger, hungrier teams that will probably finish above them, and I think their lack of ability to probably win games that are winnable for them are probably going to bite them in the butt. So I'm going under.
Yeah, and I think I get where you're coming from because, say, like, San Antonio, right? Their over-under is 43.5, and we picked under for them. But even though we picked under for them, I think they'll be a better team than the Kings.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, so the Kings could win 34 games, and the Spurs could win 41, and then that still kind of fits there. I don't know. The Kings one is tough because it's like I do kind of want to go over because 35 seems so low.
It is low.
It's just, again, where are the wins going to come from? Like, they can't just, but I guess you make the case of if you want to get to 35 wins, that means you got to do okay in the Eastern Conference. But then you still have to win against the bottom feeders of the West, whomever they may be. And then you'll still have to probably get some wins against some other Western Conference teams. And there may not be enough wins. They got to 39 wins last year. But again, a lot of those wins were, I believe, before that trade happened. So if that's the case, yeah, then I think, yeah, I'll probably go under for that one because, this version of the team is definitely not going to be as good as the previous versions of the team. And that's where it could get really ugly. This is one of those, but again, why is it that low? It's that low because it's a team that I think most people universally just do not believe in. And there's no real reason to believe in them. So I think in that regard, that's you go under for that one. It's kind of funny just thinking about it because we've picked under for a lot of these Western Conference teams. So what is your thought process for picking under for a lot of these? Is it just that you're just not buying some of these teams that are kind of in that mid to lower tier are going to be as good, or is it just or you believe more in the teams up top and they're just going to beat the tar out of the lower tier teams? Like, what do you think?
I believe in the teams up top a lot. Like, I believe in the OKC Thunder. I believe in the Rockets. I believe in, Denver, LA. Like, I believe in those kinds of teams. Whereas, I look at, teams like Phoenix. I look at teams like Sacramento, even like a San Antonio, right? Where you talked about it. Yeah, they got drastically better and are probably going to be better based off of, internal development and obviously the key additions, but they're still young, right? They have things to learn. Whereas Sacramento, I just don't have a lot of faith in what they can accomplish because I've seen it before. I saw it last year, and I've seen it other places as well, right? The duo is not going to work, and Sabonis is definitely not the missing piece. So that's where I'm kind of just, if I'm low on a team, I'm most likely going to pick the under, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Matt Ishbia might disagree with you on that one, right? Because
Sure.
I think he was quoted the other day, right, talking about I'm not worried about what the so-called experts think. They had us as a title contender the past 2 years, and they were wrong then. So
Yeah, isn't that the guy who completely destroyed what Phoenix had going for it? But sure.
yeah, I mean that's kind of a wild quote. It almost reads as like an NBA Centel quote,
Seriously.
but it's a real one. It's an actual real quote.
Seriously.
Yeah, so let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Sacramento Kings. Who knows? That one of the teams to watch out for as a team that just completely sells by the deadline. I don't, because again, my thought process is it seems like they want to compete, so they may just go down with the sinking ship. But if they're smart, that's a team that should sell at the deadline, in my opinion. But I don't know if they will.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope they would. I think that would be the logical thing to do. But when has this franchise ever done anything logical? So I would leave it there.
They had what 1 or 2 years, I think, where they did, and
Yeah,
then went right back to they flipped the common sense switch off.
exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, like I said, let us know your thoughts and comments about the Sacramento Kings. But we're gonna move on to another team. This is the Chicago Bulls, right? Another kind of middling team in the NBA, right? This was a team that, unlike the Kings, they had a stronger second half of the season last year, right? Where led by a lot of their younger guys, right? Say, for example, Josh Giddey, who they acquired from the Oklahoma City Thunder, of course. Also led by some of these other guys that they grabbed, right? I mean, after the Levine trade, right, was kind of where the Bulls played their best basketball, right? Like where they had, Bucelas playing as well. As I already mentioned, Josh Giddey, right, as well as some of these other guys like Vucevic, who actually had a really good year last year. Kobe White, right? Patrick Williams just existing, and everyone else on this roster. But so far this summer, haven't done a ton. They did make a move in the draft, right? They drafted Noah Asengay, right? Who again, we'll see what he does. Probably won't play a whole lot for the Bulls early on because I just feel like he's probably lower on the depth chart, I would say, than some of these other guys, right? So again, the best case scenario version of him could be somebody that is a very versatile all around, big forward, right? 6'10", long wingspan. But is that going to be the case as a rookie? Probably not. I think he's a project guy. So again, we'll see what he does by the time he reaches that, but he won't be there this year. But the younger guys, right? Bucelas, again, didn't play early on, but then got more and more opportunities and ended up finishing pretty strong, right? He ended up looking like a really solid pick because he fell in the draft, right? Lower than where some people had him, right? Because remember, at one point, he was looked at as a potential number one guy when he first got into that G League Ignite situation, right? He was another one of those guys like Ron Holland that was ranked much higher than what he ended up being drafted as, right? But I like him. I think he's going to be a good player, but what's his ceiling as a player? Can he be one of the best or two best guys on a really, really good team? I don't know. I mean, we'll see, but he's not going to be that next year, I would say. And then after that, Vucevic is in the last year of his deal. Thought he might get traded at the deadline, and he didn't. Thought he might get traded before that, and he didn't. He's been here for a while. But he's now 35 years old, coming off, again, a really good year. There were talks about maybe he gets bought out, but it seems like he's not going to get bought out. He made some comments about the GM and said, "Hey guys, I know that you guys think he's not that great, but like give him a chance. Like he's actually pretty good." I'm paraphrasing here. It's not a direct quote, but so that's a kind of a nice, I guess, gesture. But if we look at most of the Bulls' moves as of late, they've been kind of not that great. But just in terms of this roster, again, there's not a whole lot to break down. I am curious to see, like I said, what they do with these young guys, because Kobe White's in the last year of his deal. Do they give him an extension? Do they go into free agency and bring him back? Does he go elsewhere? Is he traded? They did trade Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro, right? And Okoro, again, was a part of that Cavs team last year that won, 60 plus games. But funny enough, he really wasn't a starter, right? Like the Cavs' best year last season was with Okoro playing a little bit more of a limited role, right? And he was, again, a former top 5 pick, right? So if he comes in as a 3-and-D wing and helps out the Bulls on the defensive end, okay. But so far, he's been just okay. I think he's been kind of a disappointment given where he was drafted and, given some of the other guys that were drafted after him. It feels like kind of a letdown. So he's 25, so how much better is he really going to be at this point? Not sure, right? Jalen Smith, that was the big that initially was drafted by Phoenix, and now he's, in Chicago after being in Indiana at one point. Again, he's also 25. He's okay. But they have a lot of bigs and a lot of other players on this roster. Kevin Huerter's in the last year of his deal. Zach Collins is in the last year of his deal, right? Those guys came over from other teams, again, in the Zach LaVine deal, right? Collins came over from the Spurs, and Huerter came over from the Kings. So a lot of guys coming over from other teams. But again, the question is, last year, right, that final stretch of the season, they were pretty good, right? They were looked at as like, a team that plays fast, can get up a ton of shots, score a ton of points. We're not a great 3-point shooting team, but a really fun, fast, interesting team that got a lot of wins. And then in the play-in, they stunk again, right? They lost to the Miami Heat. And, just that's kind of the gift that keeps on giving for the Bulls, because they really haven't gotten any further than that in quite some time, right? The last time they made the playoffs, right, if I'm not mistaken, right, was back in that 21-22 season, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so outside of that, 23, they were in the play-in. They beat the Raptors, but then they lost to the Heat. And then 24, they lost to the Heat again. And I think that was in that second play-in game, right? Because they stomped the Hawks, I think, in the first play-in game in 24. So it's just kind of wild how they've kept meeting up with the Heat. But the Bulls have not gotten the benefit of getting further. They've been, again, one of the more mediocre teams in the league. So they're in this weird spot where I like their young players, but they don't have a guy, in my opinion, that's like a franchise centerpiece. They need that. They haven't been bad enough to really get it. So that's something that they should probably consider. And then their vets, some of them, like, because of their contracts, it's okay to just have them on this team. But some of those guys probably would just be better served to be on another team. Like Vucevic would probably just be better served to be on some other team, right? Some type of contending team. Again, he is 35. He came off a really good year last year. How much does he have left in the tank? I don't know. But their team is weird. It's different than the Kings because the expectations aren't the same. But it's disappointing because there was a stretch like the Kings where the Bulls were good, but they were forced to kind of blow that up because of all the injuries. But they waited so long, and they really got very little from all those guys. They got Isaac Okoro out of Lonzo Ball, and then they got really nothing for DeRozan.
Yeah.
And then from LaVine, they just got role players, which I guess should be expected. But you sold kind of at all their low points. So you just, so you kind of waste. And even Caruso, right? Like, you got Josh Giddey. Like, we liked that at the time, even though the Bulls got no firsts. They could have gotten multiple firsts for Caruso. But guess what? Right now, they don't want to pay Josh Giddey. Now, they're in an advantageous position. Just so happens this free agency was a year where not a lot of teams had cap space, so there's nowhere he can really go. And he had a good year last year. But still, how much are they going to be willing to pay him? They'll both probably come to some type of agreement. It won't be $30 million a year like what Giddey's looking for, but who knows? It could be 20, right? It could be somewhere around that, and that would be all right for him. May not be 5 years. Who knows? Maybe he'll take 3 and then just try to hit free agency a few years from now when he's still good, because he's still a pretty young guy himself. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he's about 22 or so?
Yeah, 22, 23.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, again, and a good player. So, when I look at this Bulls offseason, I mean, do I want to give him an F like the Kings? Kind of, because
Yeah.
I mean, but again, I guess in fairness, I'm not like, part of it is biased because I know that the Bulls just don't like doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of an F too, because it's like, all right, I'm waiting for them to sign Giddey. I mean, clearly they're not going to overpay him, which is fine. You shouldn't overpay him. But they've done nothing else, right? Again, Asenge could be good a few years from now, but I don't think he'll be that great out of the gates. But I also understand they have young players, and so they're not just going to, flip the whole roster upside down. But just, again, Isaac Okoro, that trade was just weird. Like, that was just a weird trade, in my opinion. Like, okay, Lonzo could be good for Cleveland if he plays, but I don't know how much he's going to play. And then clearly Cleveland didn't want Isaac Okoro because, again, he was a top 5 pick and he's just been okay, but I think kind of underwhelming. So is he going to be better than underwhelming for the Bulls? Maybe, but I mean, then where does that leave Patrick Williams, right? Patrick Williams, they gave a big contract, right, last offseason, which was probably not a good idea. It's not a crazy amount of money per year. It's $18 million, but it's still $18 million for a guy who doesn't really consistently play and doesn't really put up that big of numbers. And he's not like a guy where people will say, oh, well, his impact doesn't really reflect his box score numbers, right? He's not that. Like, there's a lot of games where you just don't even realize he's there, right? Which is not a good thing. So overall, when I look at this roster, didn't think there was a whole lot they could do or would do. So my expectations were pretty low. But even then, still didn't really love about anything they did. So that's kind of an F for me. But again, Asenge, that's a decent pick. So maybe if you want, you could bump that up by a letter. But I don't think it's enough to bump it up by a letter because, again, he's not a guy that I expect to be that good for at least a couple seasons.
Yeah. I'm going F2. A different kind of F than the Kings. I know that might be kind of hard to rationalize, but I mean, if you think about it, they're two franchises in two different spots, two different areas, right? But at the end of the day, it's an off-season grade, right? Like, if we're grading in terms of future and potential, I love what Chicago has going on in terms of, what Mataz could potentially be. I like Kobe White a lot. Like, I like a lot of the young guys on that roster. However, in terms of adding and subtracting and what you did in the offseason, I can only but give an F, right? You haven't done anything with Josh Giddey. Granted, that might actually work out in your favor. However, you brought in the Noah Asenge player, but that's more of a project kind of player, in my opinion, right? He wasn't like, touted to be a, crazy, star out the gate. So that's kind of going to be more on the lines of, okay, this guy could be really, really good or really, really freaking bad. And then you bring in Isaac Okoro. I mean, it doesn't really help. I help a whole lot. Like,
do you feel like there was a winner for that trade?
No, not really, because Cleveland gets Lonzo, who's very injury prone. We don't know what he's going to look like, I guess, and can he even stay healthy for that team? And then Isaac Okoro, you get somebody who I think, just didn't really pan out in terms of what he was projected to be. And what his role is now in the league is kind of awkward because of his height and size and frame and stuff, right? Like, he's a good defender. However, he could be so much better and probably more serviceable if he was a little bit taller. So, and then the money thing, that is kind of weird too, because now you're paying what, like almost 60 mil combined between like what, Patrick Williams and Okoro as well. So it's like, I don't really like that a lot. And it's kind of wild that they're both top 5 picks from that 2020 draft. But I don't know. I just feel like there's some things that make sense with this team, which is the young guys, and there's some things that don't, which are,
Right.
the lack of movement. And then also when you do make a move, it's for Isaac Okoro. I don't think that was what they needed to do. I think they needed to maybe find a way to maybe flip Vooch into something a little bit more positive, because I think Vooch, as great of a player as he is and as great of a season as he had last year, the question still remains, why is he on the team? So I just don't think he really fits their timeline and what they should be going for. And I think we've been saying that for a couple seasons now. And it was really that whole core and that whole unit of guys. So he's kind of the last one remaining. But overall, not too pleased with the moves that they did on the offseason, but I'm still high on their future. I just do want to make that very clear, because there's a very big difference in terms of having an F for the offseason like the Kings, and I don't like their future, versus this team.
Right. And we said that at different points when we were trying to kind of figure out how to kind of grade these on a curve, because we've said multiple times, like, you kind of have to look at it from the perspective of those different teams, because like we talked about with Boston, like, it felt like I gave them a D, but I think you felt like it was a little bit too harsh, because it's like, well, their goal wasn't the same as what it was before. Their goal is to now kind of have a gap year, maybe kind of make some moves around the margins to kind of retool, whereas like you said with the Bulls, their young core they have a young core, like, but they still need another guy in there that, like I said, needs to be like the main player. Like the Kings don't really have much of a young core, in my opinion. So that's where, like, when I'm looking at the Bulls, I think it's just a remnant of the two timelines thing, right? Where it's like they had a team in place that was a good team, almost half a decade ago. But like I said, they waited too long to trade most of those guys when they should have started selling earlier. Like I said, when their value was a lot higher, and they got very little back for those guys. So now they kind of have to not completely start from scratch, but but in a way it kind of is. Because again, none of these guys that they have, I like a lot of their young players, but none of those guys will ever be franchise players. Like Kobe White is a really good player. I don't think he's a franchise level player.
No.
Same with like Bucelas, right? Like I think he's a good player, but not a franchise guy. So, but in order to get that, you need to be worse than what they've been. And like they've been not that good, but not horrible enough to be, like a team that gets like a top 5 pick every year. They've been kind of in no man's land, which is kind of one of the worst spots to be in. And if you're a Bulls fan, I feel kind of bad for you, just because, again, like this was probably the first time in a minute that they had a decent stretch of rooting for their team. But it's like, at what cost? Because it's like, that this team still isn't really good enough to do a whole lot. You still need like another piece. But I guess I like it better than the Kings. But even then, their ownership clearly doesn't want to pay. Like, and their ownership's been established for a long time, so we kind of know what to expect from them. It feels like one of those teams where, like, it'd be nice, like, if somebody like stepped in and was like, all right, I'll take the Bulls off your hands, and kind of have somebody else, own the team. Because then I think you actually could get some stuff going here. Because again, it's a big market, it's a popular city, so there's a lot to work with here that you may not be able to do with some of these other teams. But that's, I think, kind of one of the main things that's holding them back. But I can at least kind of see somewhat of a vision, but in terms of the young players. But they need to kind of do something about some of these other guys. But at the very least, I guess it's better than nothing, but it's still not good, in my opinion, in terms of what they did this summer. They still have to do more. And
Yeah.
they got to, they at some point, they got to figure out the Giddey thing, which I think they will. But after that, there's not really anything else they're probably going to do. They'll probably just kind of go into the season with the roster as is and see where they go. And it is the Eastern Conference, so maybe there's a pathway for them to be in the play-in again. But am I expecting them to take a leap and be a playoff team next year? I would say no, because there were a couple of teams that missed the playoffs or were lower seeds that I think will be better. Like Atlanta missed the playoffs. I expect the Hawks to be better than Chicago, right?
Yeah.
The Magic, I guess, were the 7 seed. I expect them to also be better than Chicago. Even the Bucks, who I know we've picked on a bunch, like I expect them to be better than Chicago.
Yeah.
So, the Bulls to me probably in a similar spot as they've been in before, which I don't think is a great thing. So it would be nice if they could kind of fully commit to the young guys, but just be bad. Like to me, commit to being bad as opposed to just being mediocre, because I don't think they're good enough to be a competitive team.
I agree.
So if that's the case, when we're looking at this Bulls roster, who would you like to kind of keep around?
Ooh, I would say all the young guys are. I'm not going to say untouchable, but it's more so. All right, we kind of have a somewhat of a roadmap. We just need to find our franchise guy, right? Like I like Mataz a lot. I like Kobe White as well. I mean, then you kind of start to get into the territory of, all right, well, what are we doing? I think Kevin Huerter might be a little questionable. I think Desumu's pretty good too. I like Desumu a lot. Yeah, outside of that, it's like, all right, well, what's the vision? I'm not sold on Patrick Williams at all. And that's pretty much it that I really like to say, because I mean the rest are kind of like veterans here and there, like Javon Carter, fine.
Yeah,
But
it's like Buscella, Giddy, and then Kobe White. Like those are the 3 guys that you probably like the most.
Yeah.
That you're probably like the most motivated to try to keep.
Yeah, and it's like Vucevic, like I already said, probably shouldn't be on the team as good as he is. Just not, I think, fit in terms of the timeline. So outside of those guys, I think everybody else is movable.
Yeah. So like Kobe White's in the last year of his deal, right? He's making just under $13 million next season. So I'm going to assume that whatever his new contract is will be bigger than that. So if you're the Bulls, are you giving him that contract? Like, let's say he starts let's say he's like at least $20 million a year.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would say why not? Give him a contract. I think it makes sense. I think he's proven that he could be, a talent, like you said, not the franchise guy, but definitely, a solid enough point guard where I think he's reliable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think the issue is that, again, the contract that he has, you're not getting a lot back for him. You're not getting players. You're probably not really getting picks aside from like maybe a protected one because he's in expiring, right? It's not like he's already been paid and he's got multiple seasons left. He's in expiring. So there's always the threat that whoever trades for him could just walk. So, I mean, if you're the Bulls, I mean, they have a lot of guys that are in the last year of their deals, like Vucevic, Zach Collins. Both those guys are $20 million guys. So that's $40 million off the book. So yeah, why not? Kevin Huerter, same thing. So, yeah, I mean, you might as well re-sign him. Hope that you're bad, and then see if you can kind of get another guy in there. But I guess if that's the case, you got White, you got Giddy, you got Bucelis, and those are kind of your, main guys. Right after that, I think everyone else is kind of like you can just swap out. But again, Patrick Williams is probably not like that movable of a contract, and doesn't make a lot of money. I just don't think he has a lot of value, right? And it's wild because, as you mentioned, that was a guy that was drafted, I think, what was he, like 3rd or 4th overall in that 2020 NBA draft? I guess it was 4, right? And, he had a decent rookie year and looked like he had some promise, but just feels like he just hasn't improved substantially since then. He's almost been kind of just stuck in a similar spot. And he was pretty young when he was drafted because he's only 24. So I think the thought process was he was so young that he's got a lot of room to grow. It just seems like it hasn't worked out. So I think they're just probably stuck with him. And maybe that's why they got a Okoro, right? Because then they're just, like, well, they're kind of similar-ish players, I guess. So, we'll see what happens with that. But looking at their over-under is at 30.5. This was one that we got wrong last year because I believe we picked under for the Bulls last year, and they ended up hitting the over because they won 37 games. So what do we think of the Bulls for 30.5? Are we over or under?
I think I'm. This is an interesting one. I think I'm gonna go over on them.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I
Because
think I'm gonna go over.
they've consistently been able to hit somewhere, in the ballpark of like 35, 37 wins or so. Like in the Eastern Conference, they'll be okay enough to where I think they can win enough of those games to. But again, I don't really want that if I'm the Bulls. Like I'd prefer to be worse. But just based off the players that they have on this team, like if Giddy and Bucelis and those other young guys continue to build off of what they did towards the end of last season, and it wasn't just like a complete fluke, which it might have been. But if they build off that, I mean, there's no real reason why it shouldn't be like a similar amount of
Yeah,
wins. So, I mean, yeah, I think that one's an over, but it's not an over where it's like, this is one where it's like, I don't think it's a good thing if the Bulls are close to 40 wins again, because that's going to be a similar outcome where you're going to be in the play in, probably not going to win. And then you'll get like a middling draft pick again, and you'll have to hope and pray that your non-top that your lower half of the lottery pick is going to be good,
yeah,
which they could be, but still.
yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah, so let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Chicago Bulls and where do you think they're going to land in the Eastern Conference and where they stand and how you feel about their players. But either way, now we'll get into everything else that we normally talk about, right? In terms of news and rumors, not a whole lot going around the NBA because again, at this point we're at the end of August, so we're getting closer and closer to training camp, but we're not quite there yet. The main thing now is we do have the Eurobasket going on, right? And where the teams from overseas, like say Slovenia, they were playing Poland, or Giannis's Greek team, or Jokic's team, with Serbia. Like all those guys are now playing because now they're games that actually count. Because before, I guess they were doing sort of like those games where they're kind of like tune-up games, but now their games, they're actually doing stuff, and these games matter now. So you're going to probably start to see closer to all these guys' best versions of themselves. And there's a number of guys that, even outside of the usual suspects that have played well. Like Markkanen's been a monster in these Eurobasket games where he's, putting up 30, 40, 50 in a game. Uh, you know, Looking kind of like the Markkanen from, when he was an all-star a couple seasons ago. So, if you get that version of Markkanen for Utah, you'll still suck, but you'd rather have that version of Markkanen making 50 million than the version that we got last year, where I think some of that was just bad team, not that motivated, wasn't playing as much. I don't think he's just washed, but the Eurobasket thing is pretty cool though.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. It it gives a lot of the international players a lot of shine and show when normally they might not be a number one option, or sometimes might not even crack the rotation, right? And it's good for the young guys as well who are also participating. So it is pretty fire.
Yeah. And according to The Athletic, Sam Amick is reporting that the Kings reportedly resisting the urge to sign Russell Westbrook amid Kuminga rumors, where the idea is that Kuminga is holding up a lot of the stuff, I guess, for the Kings, because I guess they want him, or they were trying to get him, and they offered, a package that the Warriors turned down. And Jake Fisher said that the Kings, continue to covet Westbrook, and that a trade could be needed to clear room for him. And that's what we kind of said earlier, where we were talking about that the Kings want Russ, but they're going to have to do something in order to open up the roster spot, because they signed Doug McDermott. So that would be my other question, where it's like, well, how committed are you to wanting Westbrook when you signed other guys ahead of him that honestly I don't see why you couldn't have just signed Russ. But
I
I
agree.
don't run the team, so I don't make the decisions here. But do you expect Russ to be a Sacramento King? Because I mean, pretty much most of what's been reported almost is if he doesn't get signed by them, he may just not be on any team
Yeah,
starting next season, which is kind of wild considering it wasn't like he was bad last year.
yeah. It's a
Quite the
wild
opposite.
yeah, it's a wild situation because I think he was. I mean, towards the beginning of the year, yeah, there were some very big issues, but
Yeah.
as time went on, I think you saw that the fit was there. He has a ton, to bring, and even in the postseason, you saw it. So it is kind of a wild turn, but yeah, it is kind of wild that it's pretty much Sacramento or nothing, which is scary, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, because I mean, I mean, and that's the wild thing because like we're talking about the Kings right now, but just imagine that roster with that composition of players. sounds too bizarre to me. It just sounds like kind of a nightmare. But again, I don't make the decisions for that team, so I'd be curious at least to see what it looks like. But I think that's a team where, again, I don't think that they're going to be that great.
I agree.
So moving on, now we go into the rest of our discussion, where we usually bring up, the polls that we put out on IG. And our last one was about the Dallas Mavericks. And the question was, will Cooper Flagg be a generational talent? Right? So this was related to the Dallas Mavericks offseason discussion. And we got 100% of the responses said yes. So seems like most people are buying stock in Cooper Flagg and how great he's going to be.
Yeah, the hype tracks. I think it makes sense, right? And we already talked about it. He has the intangibles. He's got, the defensive IQ and ability, right, off rip. So it's just a matter of being well-rounded and then obviously, being elite in certain categories.
Yes. Then we have a couple of comments to read before we get out of here. And we have one from Cam8868. D'Lo as the primary ball handler sounds like a nightmare. LOL. So this is from Are the Mavs a Legit Contender short that we put up on YouTube. And yeah, that's kind of what we talked about in the video, where while Kyrie is out, yeah, D'Lo is going to be your primary ball handler at that point guard spot, along with Cooper Flagg. And it's not an ideal position to be in, which is one of the reasons why. I mean, that's not the only reason, but Kyrie's injury is a big part of why we kind of have under on the Mavs. And again, we could be selling them short, because I think there is a pathway for them to be pretty good. But I'm just not banking on, with Kyrie, I'm just not banking on Kyrie coming back anytime soon. And even if he does, you got to hope and pray that the rest of the roster is healthy. And you talked about it too, where there are guys on that roster that are not locks to play a ton of games. And if any of their key guys, in addition to Kyrie, miss time, then you become even worse. And that's kind of the tough part when you're already relying on a team that's going to be without one of its best players for most of the season.
Yeah, I understand his concern 100%. We even talked about it, right? High usage, low efficiency. That's the track record with D'Lo, unfortunately. And I'm a big D'Lo supporter. That's my guy. But at the same time, you have to face the facts where, that's a lot of pressure, I think, to put on him in terms of that. I think the playmaking is fine, but I think the decision making in terms of shot selection is probably where things can get tricky, right? And I don't know.
Him being your number one option.
Exactly, and I don't know how that's going to look. And I think that's
the number one. And he won't be the number one scorer, but he's still going to have the ball in his hands more than what he's had recently.
Right.
And that's not really what you want if you're trying to win a lot of games.
Right.
Presumably that's what the Mavs are trying to do. But either way, it's the Kyrie injury that's the big issue, right? Yeah. If Kyrie was healthy, then there's no real issues at all because he's not starting.
Yeah, because look at the trend. Look at the trend since his first, stint in Brooklyn. It's kind of been a somewhat downhill spiral in terms of, the efficiency and usage. So just be mindful of that when you are talking about D'Lo.
Yeah, because I think the full year he was with the Lakers, so the season after he was traded there, he had one of his best years as a pro. He was really good that year. But, he had the ball in his hands a decent amount, right? Then last year, they transitioned to Austin Reeves. Makes sense. He's the better player now. And then the ball was in his hands less, and he became a little bit less effective, and he got moved to the bench. And now, he's going to be, I think now he's a six-man guy, which is probably, I think, the most ideal role for him at this point. You probably don't want him to be your starting point guard if you're going to be really, really good. But again, he's going to have to start and play for them. And again, there's worse things, there's worse positions you could be in, but it's still not ideal for the Mavs, which is kind of, like I said, why we picked the under.
Yep.
And then we also had another comment from Dylan Martin 2890. No, they will not be good this year. AD ain't doing bleep except sitting out, and the Spurs are in their conference, which is essentially just a better version of them.
Fair. I could see,
I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, I could see that. And we talked about that, right? Where San Antonio and Dallas are probably going to be neck and neck defensively. It's going to come down to who's better offensively. And, we'll see how that plans out. But, I think that's a valid point where, you don't know what AD is going to look like and how many games he's going to play.
Right. I think for the Spurs outside, like for the Mavs, they have more proven talent outside of Wemby and Fox for the Spurs. But, the issue is that like you have to bank on those guys playing. And we already know that Kyrie is not going to play at least a decent chunk of the season. If the Mavs were fully healthy, then I think you would pick them over the Spurs, assuming full health. Like in terms of how many games they could win, you'd feel more confident and comfortable about it. But already knowing that Kyrie's going to miss time, and again, any other guy that has to miss time, the second that happens, that team's probably going to start to fall apart because you're just not going to be able to make up for absences of multiple of your best players. Like no team can really do that. I mean that just doesn't happen unless you're just having a stretch where you're playing horrible teams, but your margin for error is so much lower. So, I just hadn't thought about it where it's like are the Spurs a better version of the Mavs? I hadn't really thought that.
I can see the logic. I understand what he's saying. I think
Right.
defensively they have a great mold. And I think offensively they also can have the potential to have a higher, starting point with having Wemby and De'Aaron Fox. So I could see it.
Yeah, I just hadn't thought about that because it's just like I think the thought process is Kyrie and AD are more established guys. They have a little bit more, recognizable players. But I think you could make the case that the Spurs may just have more upside just because their roster makes a little bit more sense. But the issue is you still have to bank on their young guys panning out, and some of them we just haven't seen enough of. But I think they'll probably be in a similar tier. It's just the difference is if you're a Spurs fan, I think you'll feel better about where you are than if you're a Mavs fan. Because if you're a Spurs fan, you expect to be better than what you were last year. I think if you're a Mavs fan, you're hoping that you're not worse than you were last year, or like you're hoping that you're going to be not at it's hard to word it correctly, but it's more so just like I think the Spurs probably have more upside, and I think the expectations for them are different because the Mavs players feel like players that you'd want on a contending championship level team,
Yeah,
but
I
they're
agree.
probably not going to be good enough to be that. The Spurs players feels like that's a team that's a young team on the rise, and they fit that profile. So like their build, I think probably fits the description more than the Mavs. Like the Mavs feel more like a pretender, whereas the Spurs are not either. They're not a contender or a pretender, but they fit the description of what people expect them to be. A young team that's got upside that could be better than what some people think. But it's not the worst thing in the world if they, get in the play-in and then lose and don't make the playoffs. It'd be worse if you're the Mavs because your upside is probably outside of Cooper Flag going to be worse and worse each year because Kyrie and AD at their age, they're probably not going to be much better from here on out.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Yep. I get it.
Yeah. So, again, let us know your thoughts in the comments. This concludes the episode for Off Ball Takes. Again, if you want to throw your thoughts into these polls, just go on IG at the OBT Podcast and weigh in. If you want to leave a comment on any of our shorts or videos or other socials at the OBT Podcast, same thing. And continuing to like and subscribe for our content, help the channel grow as we're getting closer and closer to training camp, preseason, and NBA season. It's almost here. Still have to wait a while, but it's getting closer. So we appreciate all that. Thanks for watching.